We have crossed to the top of the hour, 7:02 here in New York, closing in on the first 100 days of President Trump's second term in office. This morning, Time is out with an exclusive interview with the Commander-in-Chief, where the president discusses a range of topics from his administration following court orders to the future of Ukraine. Joining us now on Morning Joe for the first broadcast discussion of that interview, senior political correspondent at Time, Eric Cortellessa. He was part of the team conducting the interview with President Trump. Also with us, NBC News and MSNBC political analyst, former U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill. Good morning to you both. So, Eric, I'll start with you. You spent about an hour in the room with the president. What was your headline coming out of it?
Well, I think, my main impression was that, the last two times I spoke with President Trump, he was in a very sort of triumphant setting. Either he was on pace to, beat Joe Biden in the election, or he had just won the presidency. In this instance, he's now confronted with the challenges of governing. I think, a couple of big things came out of the interview. For one, I think Donald Trump provided some insight into his view about the tariffs, specifically when, we asked whether or not he would consider it a victory if we still had high tariffs on foreign imports a year from now, as high as 20%, 30%, 50%. He called it a total victory. So, I think that he's not planning to necessarily back down on the tariffs. He did say that he had spoken with Xi more than once since he announced his tariffs, and that there were talks ongoing between his administration and the Chinese. The Chinese deny that, but the Trump administration says they're embarking on talks and are optimistic for a deal. He said he had 200 deals that were inked at one point, but didn't say when they would be announced. A number of other very newsy items that came out of the interview, but those are just a couple of the main ones.
Yeah, Eric, it's a very all-encompassing interview, and congratulations for pushing back on several things. Clearly, but you just mentioned the deals aspect, that he's made 200 deals already, and you ask him, when are you going to announce them? Well, not time. How did you handle this throughout that entire interview on each and every topic? There was discrepancies between reality and what the president is telling you.
Yeah, just kept asking him as much as I could, what he was doing, what he was going to do. I think, there's a very sort of telling sequence, particularly when we spoke about complying with court orders. President Trump, as I asked him, why he was not facilitating the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, despite the Supreme Court's ruling, his answer was that his lawyers are telling him that that is not what the Supreme Court ruling says. I read for him the ruling. He still disputed it. When I asked whether or not he had asked President Bukele of El Salvador to facilitate his release or to bring him back, he said that he hadn't asked him positively. And so, throughout the interview, I found that Trump was, more evasive, more cantankerous than he has been in the past. Throughout the interview, he's very, gracious at other points as well. But, it was always, involved pushing back as much as he could to try and get an answer from him.
So, Eric, I want to continue on that Abrego Garcia conversation. It stood out to me. It's fascinating. You all asked him, couldn't you just bring him back and try him here if you believe that he's a member of a gang, if you believe that he's committed crimes? And the president said you could bring him back. That's exactly right. You could fix this simply by bringing him back and going through the legal process. But I leave that decision to the lawyers, which seemed to be an answer throughout this section of your conversation. It's up to my lawyers. It's up to my lawyers. And he says, and they don't want to do that right now. It sort of defies credibility that he could not just call the president of El Salvador and say, we need this guy back. And if we think he's a criminal, we'll put him on trial. They've admitted. They said it was a mistake, an administrative error. But it did sound a little softer than I've heard him before, saying, yeah, I guess we could bring him back and try him, but that's up to my lawyers.
Yeah, I think he really, reverted to that answer over and over again during this sequence of the conversation, that it's up to my lawyers. My lawyers have told me that's not what the ruling says. My lawyers told me I don't have to do that. So I think he was advised at some point to say that anytime he was asked on the subject. And, he was pretty persistent in holding that line.
All right, Claire McCaskill's got a question for you. Claire?
So on a related subject matter, I'm curious, what is your sense about this pending confrontation with the judges writ large? He is losing in court. I think Trump-appointed judges have ruled against him more than 60% of the time. Which is a huge mark for Trump-appointed judges ruling against the president. Do you sense that he has the gravity of the situation front of mind, that he is in a position to really put our country in a constitutional crisis that we've never seen before? Or is he just brushing it off and acting as if this is business as usual with a bunch of scallywags on the bench?
Yeah, I didn't get the sense that President Trump thinks we're heading toward a constitutional crisis that he's precipitated. I think he thinks that, the judges are trying to stand in his way from him being able to implement his agenda. Both him and, senior advisors to President Trump, both, they all complained to me in conversations that there were regional judges who were trying to usurp his authority on foreign policy and that they would fight back as vigorously as possible. So I think, Trump basically sees these judges as a nuisance who are standing in his way for that, standing in his way for him being able to enact the policies that he campaigned on. He says, this is exactly what I said I was going to do during the campaign. I said I was going to deport people. I said I was going to do all the things that I'm doing. And, he's basically saying he's not going to let judges stand in the way. He said, by the way, he did say he would comply with Supreme Court orders, and he said he would comply with lower court orders. Obviously, he has challenged the lower courts. He called for Judge Boasberg to be impeached. And as we've seen from this case involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he hasn't moved to try to bring this man back. So, we'll see where it goes from here. But I think Trump basically sees these judges as an impediment. But he doesn't seem all too fazed about the consequences that he thinks may follow.
Eric, was there any sense of frustration on the part of the president? He said he was going to end the war in Ukraine in a day. The war, he didn't do that. He said that he was going to fix the economy just like that. Of course, the economy hadn't been fixed, and in fact, we may be in a recession that he seems to have brought on. Was there any frustration that he hasn't been able to deliver on a lot of the things that he promised?
It's interesting because I asked about the Ukraine thing. I said, President Trump, you said you would solve this issue in a day. What's going on? And, he said, oh, I said that in jest, Eric. Everybody knew that was symbolic. I wasn't really saying I was going to get it done in a day. This has been going on for 3 years. I've only been here in 3 months. So, I sensed that there was some frustration on his part. And I also think, he pulled back on that claim that he'd be able to solve the war in 24 hours. Of course, he's not wrong that it's a very complicated, he's not wrong now that it's a very complicated issue and it's hard to solve. And he's got intractable players, in Vladimir Putin. But, I do think, this is a different moment for him than the last time I spoke with him, because he is right now facing all of these problems that you're talking about.
Senior political correspondent at Time, Eric Cortellessa, thank you. That exclusive interview in Time available now to read online. Eric, thanks so much.